Welcome to my listening session. This is an excerpt from my novel, Keeping Up Appearances. Faye's drive to school was usually 15 minutes of pre-game strategizing as she prepared for the day. Of course, her plans were usually hijacked by parents and students, but that made the job of principal interesting. She'd just organized her morning when her cell phone rang. It was her brother, Rob. "It's awfully early," she answered. "I know. Look, I want you to meet this permanent sub that's working at my school." Faye rolled her eyes. "Not again. The last woman you set me up with was 24. I'm 41, bro. I want someone who knows that Paul McCartney was in a band before Wings and actually owned bell-bottom pants." No, this woman would be great. She's an academic. She's writing her dissertation on urban societies, and she's subbing on the side. Faye sighed. As a high school history teacher, Rob met many women, some of whom were gay and single. He saw each one as a potential date for his old biddy lesbian spinster sister. He steered clear to the straight ones, having been financially castrated by a woman he only referred to as the Dragon Lady. "Urban societies?" Faye asked. "Sounds really interesting." "Oh, come on, sis. There's always something. Too young, too old, too butch, too femme." "That's not true. I've never said too femme," she corrected. She was incredibly attracted to women who were her opposite and relished skirts, lipstick, and perfume. "True, but when was the last time you had a date?" She rubbed her chin and turned into the school's parking lot. "Let's see. The last time you fixed me up was with that actress, Light Eternity." He sighed heavily. "That was only her stage name. Her real name was Marla, remember? The point is you don't date, and if you think I'm going to spend my golden years playing cards with you at a gay senior center, you're crazy. You need to meet someone and stop hiding behind your endless activities." "Thank you, Dr. Phil. I love you, bro, but don't try so hard, and I promise that if I ever meet anyone, I won't call you to play cards with me. I'll ask Mr. Greenbaum." "Who's Mr. Greenbaum?" "Undoubtedly the little old man who will live next to me. I'm sure he'll smell of menthol and continually forget to put in his teeth. It'll be delightful." "Have you talked to Saw?" Rob groaned. "Yes." After his divorce, Rob had decided all he could handle was online dating with women who lived far away. Saw was his current connection who lived in the Far East. "She sent me a biography of Churchill and a book on Richter's work for my birthday." "Sounds like a very thoughtful gift." "That part was great," he agreed, "but she also sent me 30 different brochures on Hong Kong." "Oh, I guess it's time to catch a plane or hit delete on email, huh?" "Thanks for the metaphor. I'm just not ready, you know?" "Honey, you're talking to someone who's entirely in touch with that emotion. Why do you think I've never lived with anyone?" "No, in your case it's because you lack direction and commitment. I'm just afraid of hooking up with a female Dracula." Faye noticed her secretary standing outside the front door, obviously waiting for her arrival. "I gotta go, bro. I'll talk to you later." She piled out of the truck and met Marion. "What's going on?" "I didn't want to tell you in front of the office staff, but Superintendent Gleason has been here already this morning." Faye stopped abruptly. "It's not even 7 o'clock. What was he doing?" "I'm not sure, but he did ask to use the phone in your office." She couldn't believe it. She pictured Gleason burrowing through her drawers, probably looking for a strap-on dildo or porn videos, anything to short-circuit her career. She quickly archived the items in her desk. In addition to the usual assortment of office supplies, Gleason could help himself to her antacid pills, aspirin, or tampons. He would undoubtedly get a thrill from her treasure drawer, where she kept her confiscated knives, shock buzzers, matches, and lighters. How long was he here? Not long. After he made his phone call, he wandered around the campus for a little while before he came by my desk and said goodbye. Great. Nothing seemed out of place in her office. She fired up her computer and had answered a dozen emails before her radio squawked again. "Ms. Burton, you're needed in the parking lot." Faye's shoulders sagged. That could only mean one thing. Marcus Kelman, her school-phobic student, wouldn't come into the building. "Mr. Salinas, I'll need your help," she called. There was no way she could handle Marcus by herself. He was a large 7th grader who had spent his youth eating steroid-injected meat. She found Mrs. Kelman leaning against the driver's door of her beat-up Toyota sedan, waiting for the cavalry's help. She's so unequipped, Faye thought. Pete Salinas joined her, and they opened the back doors, attempting to coax Marcus out. The usual tactics of sweet talk, threats, and fear didn't work. Growing impatient, Pete reached for Marcus. "No!" he screamed, thrashing his arms and kicking his feet. Pete pulled him toward the door. Attempting to help, Faye leaned into the car and grabbed his backpack just as Marcus's head lifted his head and spit in her face. "Crap!" she murmured, retreating from the car. She'd been at school for less than an hour, and she was all ready to go home. She stormed back into the office, feeling dirty. "Faye, hold up," Marion called from her desk. "Ms. Loomis is here to see you." Faye turned and faced an exceedingly attractive woman with white blonde hair who was standing in the lobby. She wore a gray suit and a red silk blouse accented by a string of pearls. She clutched a portfolio and an expensive leather purse. "Hi, I'm Andi," the woman said, extending her hand. Her eyes were cornflower blue, and they radiated an intensity that commanded respect. Her high cheekbones were dusted with a light rose blush, and her skin was fair, adding delicateness to her appearance. Faye felt an overwhelming desire to bow in front of her. She stepped back. "You really don't want to shake my hand right now." She wondered how much spittle still hung on her chin, and she plucked a tissue from the box on Marion's desk and dabbed her face. Andi smiled slightly and pointed to her own cheek with a perfectly manicured finger. "You missed a little." "Thanks," Faye said, completely embarrassed. "If you'll excuse me, I'll be right back. You can wait in my office. It's the first door on the left." Andi nodded and walked past her, leaving behind a wonderful scent that wasn't heavy or offending. Faye admired her shapely derriere swaying from side to side as she floated down the corridor. She ducked into the bathroom and quickly scrubbed her face and hands, knowing that the little bit of blush she'd applied that morning was history. When she returned to her office, Andi's perfume filled her senses. She stood at her bookcase, clearly admiring her collection of antique books and school supplies. She held a first edition McGuffey reader in her hand, slowly turning the pages. "This is unbelievable. Where did you get this?" "At an antique auction. I paid $50 for a whole pallet of items, and that was tucked inside an old hat box." Andi glanced up, her eyes wide. "You're kidding." "Nope. People clean out their relatives' attics and closets, never really knowing what they've got. It winds up at auctions, and scavengers like me pick it up for a song. You wouldn't believe some of the things I've found over the years." "I'll bet. So do you sell antiques as a second career?" Andi asked, replacing the book carefully on the shelf. "It's my hobby. I wouldn't call it a career. I have a few stalls that I rent in some buildings around town." Andi smiled and flowed into a chair. Faye watched as she daintily crossed her legs and opened her portfolio. "Well, we should probably focus on your special education requirements, specifically the problem with Constance Richardson." Faye flopped next to her, lacing her fingers behind her head. "Constance Richardson has absolutely no understanding of her son's needs, and she's making our lives miserable. Superintendent Gleason made it clear that you would make my troubles vanish." Andi chuckled, and Faye decided she had an incredible smile. "I'm not sure that's possible. In fact, I came here today to see..." Her voice trailed off as she studied a section of her notes. "The worst administrator to ever lead a public school in the state of Arizona. Faye Burton and her teacher, Barbara Strauss, are unwilling or incapable of meeting the needs of my son, Armor. For example, they refuse to allow him to participate in physical education." She gave Faye the once-over and said, "You don't look like a bigot." When Faye remained expressionless, Andi leaned back in her chair and rested her head against her hand. "Come on, Miss Burton, can't you take a joke?" she asked with a wink. The mood shifted as they hugged the line between professional and personal conversation. She was drawn to Andi, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Is that a Texas drawl I hear?" Faye asked, deciding to cross the line. "I try to hide it most of the time. People hear an accent and they think hick. I think it makes you sound interesting." Andi stared at her, and Faye felt warm all over. "Is that a fact?" She leaned forward, her perfume wafting into Faye's personal space. It was intoxicating. "So, Miss Burton, please call me Faye. And you can call me Andi. Look, Faye, can we speak frankly?" "Sure. Whatever you have to say is strictly confidential. The door's closed, and I'm known for keeping secrets." Andi raised an eyebrow. Interesting choice of words. "What do you mean?" Andi gazed at her notes and tapped her pen. Faye's gaze drifted to her chest, the curves of her breasts slightly straining against her tailored shirt. She quickly averted her eyes, imagining that a straight woman wouldn't appreciate being ogled. "What do you think of Dr. Marjorie?" Faye rolled her eyes, resisting the impulse to inform Andi that Dr. Marjorie was also known as Dr. Marshmallow. Light and fluffy with little substance. She talked expansively about the big picture, but she could never give specifics. Faye chose her words carefully. I think she's really good at decorating a Christmas tree. Andi laughed heartily and she slapped her knee. Only then did Faye notice that she wore no wedding band, but a gold ring adorned her pinky finger. That's the perfect way to describe her, the woman's big hat, no cattle. Now it was Faye's turn to laugh. That's quite an expression. They're all from my granny. Now how in the hell did Dr. Marjorie ever agree to these ridiculous demands for this kid? She shuffled through her portfolio and withdrew Armour's, known as AJ's, special education plan. It says here that Mom basically runs the show. We can't do anything for him without her okay. That's not ethical, and I don't think it's legal. You're probably right, but Constance Richardson is an attorney, and Dr. Marjorie is worried about a lawsuit or making the news. It's always been easier to agree to her very unreasonable demands. But you're thinking we need to stand up to her? Faye went to her file cabinet and removed a thick folder. This is AJ's discipline record. Much of it's from last year when he was a 6th grader. Before then, he was little, and the things he did were harmless. Disruptive, but harmless. Andi flipped randomly through the referrals. Oh, you mean like the time in 3rd grade when he took off all his clothes and ran naked through the classroom yelling, "Fasty native." Yep, harmless, and he did that last week, in addition to grabbing a boy by the hair and throwing him to the ground. Great, Andi said sarcastically. She continued to skim the papers, familiarizing herself with AJ's many transgressions, shaking her head. This doesn't bode well. He's getting more violent. And bigger, Faye added. I'm worried that someone's going to get hurt, or AJ will accidentally hurt himself. Then we'll have a lawsuit. Andi shut the folder and sighed. Okay, now I know what I'm dealing with. His plan comes up for review next month, and we can urge an alternative placement. Maybe I can persuade her. What? What about the complaint? Do you think there's a way to stop her from going to the state and complaining about us? Andi shrugged. I don't know, and I don't care. Just because a parent goes to the state doesn't mean anything. I've dealt with lots of those parents, and I've never lost a case yet. Faye snorted. I hope I'm not your first. Andi batted her eyelashes. Why, Miss Burton, we Southern ladies are known for our charms. Besides, this ain't my first rodeo. Faye smiled, and when Andi smiled in return, awkwardness stepped between them. It was as if she wanted to say something else because she made no effort to pick up her portfolio or the expensive purse that probably cost more than all of the purses combined that Faye had ever owned. She believed in sales and faux leather. Finally, Andi said, Faye, I like you. I like you too, Andi. And she did, particularly to look at. Then let me tell you something. They're out to get you. Who? Gleason and Dr. Marjorie. Well, I think it's really just Gleason, but Dr. Marjorie's his yes woman. She's always been like that, Faye said. She's a chameleon who doesn't have a mind of her own. She just agrees with the sitting superintendent to preserve her job. Well, you'd better start thinking along the same lines because Gleason's looking to replace you. Faye shrugged. Why? He says it's because of your lackluster performance, but truthfully, I think it's because he's certain that you're a lesbian. She winced at Andi's choice of words. She'd had her suspicions, but it was difficult to hear someone else confirm them, and she knew she shouldn't be surprised. Although she'd never advertised her sexuality and she'd never dated coworkers, she didn't spend hundreds of dollars on makeup and clothes. It wasn't her style, and to dress up would be like celebrating Halloween every day. Why would he think that? She asked casually, still uncertain she could trust Andi. Probably because that's what Dr. Marjorie thinks. What? Andi waved her hand. Something about running into you and your girlfriend at the mall. Faye racked her brain until she remembered 2 Christmases ago. She'd been seeing a pediatrician who'd asked her to go shopping. They'd stopped in the Macy's cosmetics department so the woman could purchase her face cream. Dr. Marjorie saw Faye and gave her a big hug. She then spent 5 minutes pumping her date about their relationship. Fortunately, the woman had enough sense to play coy. She wasn't my girlfriend, Faye said, but you are gay. She stared into Andi's eyes. Only her 2 most trusted co-workers knew about her sexuality. Johnny Clark, the counselor, and Pete Salinas, her AP. It had taken her a year to confide in them, but she had finally realized that she needed someone to talk to. Her second in command and the school counselor seemed like good choices. Yes, she answered before she could talk herself into a lie. She held her breath, wondering if her career was about to be ruined. Then you need to be careful, Andi said, gathering her things and rising. Faye knew that was true. The Glen Oaks School District was primarily upper middle class, filled with homes that proudly displayed Republican placards during every election. She was a black sheep in an ultra-conservative area. While many of her teachers and parents may have guessed at her sexuality, she never rubbed their noses in it and never made them confront their homophobia. It was only a little bit of hiding, she told herself. And she was comforted by the fact that in the great unlikelihood she ever gained a partner and they were ever spotted in public holding hands or kissing, she wouldn't deny it. They walked out to Andi's car, the awkwardness returning. Andi tossed her things into the passenger seat and leaned against the door. I'm still pretty new to Phoenix, and I love browsing for antiques. Any chance you'd be willing to show me the best places to shop? Sure, Faye sputtered. Andi's slow smile melted her, and she was certain if she looked down, she'd be gone, reduced to a puddle at Andi's feet. Great, I'll send you an email, and we can make a plan. Faye watched her drive away, realizing that she'd very much enjoyed Andi Loomis's visit, even if its purpose was to discuss Constance Richardson and her own less than propitious future. She found herself almost skipping back to the front door, excited at the prospect of seeing her socially. Good, you're out of your meeting, Marion said, dissolving the image of Andi. She held 3 phone messages in her hand. Mrs. Cassavetes would like you to call her. Apparently Pete told her she needed to grow up after she got angry when he informed her about Jeremiah's suspension. And Channel 12 called. They want to know if we're worried about our unsafe soccer goals. They're unsafe? Faye asked. I have no idea, but first you need to go visit Debbie McKeever in the science lab. Jasper's missing again, and she's ready to call the police and file a missing persons report. For a tortoise? Marion rolled her eyes. You know Debbie. Faye sighed. She did indeed know Debbie, the most fiery and emotional teacher she'd ever met. Debbie loved Jasper dearly, but he was known for climbing out of his habitat and wandering down the corridors. She took the messages from Marion and headed toward the science lab, forgetting her pleasant meeting with Andi. It was back to her regularly scheduled day. That concludes this listening session. I hope you'll enjoy more of my recordings, subscribe to my channel, and visit my website, annroberts.net.